Welcome. Start in a few minutes.
Okay. Hey, Ray.
Like I said, everybody's muted automatically, so feel free to come off the mute in the beginning and just mute yourself again once we actually start the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I can't hear you, Ray.
Welcome. Start in a few minutes. Oh, sorry about that. That's a video.
Hey, Ray.
Like it. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. I know probably about 10 more people who are going to be joining in, so we'll give them a few minutes to join. Just give it a couple more minutes. Okay, I'm good to go on our website. A few more people coming in. Hopefully we have a good weather for next week on Halloween when we have our spirit walk, just like today. So fingers crossed, I think the rain is going to be done by then. And give it 1 or 2 more minutes. All right, I guess we could get started. I'll probably be letting a few more people in as we move on. But before I get started on our program, Ghosts of the Berkshires, I just want to update you on some of the other things that we have going on in the near future. So as I just mentioned, the Spirit Walk will be in Center Cemetery next week on Halloween from 2 to 4 p.m. And the way we're doing it, just like how we did last year, where it's scheduled reservations. We put that in place for COVID, but it actually worked out really well. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to click right on a link and you just choose what time you'd like to show up. And if you get there a little bit early, it's fine. We're going to be doing short little tours of the Barnard Chapel for you to see. So hopefully you'll be able to come out, and there's definitely space left in most of the time slots. So come on down, it's free, and we have a bunch of great actors again this year like we've had in past years. For Veterans Day on November 11th, we're going to be opening up the Park of Honor. Most of you are probably familiar with it. The park right across from Maple Avenue is going to be, decorated with flags and memorials to give honor to those who have served from this area and friends and family of people who live here. There's no charge to this. If you'd like a veteran to be included, please reach out to us, Sheffield Historical Society at gmail.com. If the veteran has been honored in the past, they'll automatically be honored again. So feel free to just double check with us and we can check on our list and make sure that they are indeed included. After that, we're going to be opening up the Festival of Holidays. Most of you are familiar. It's your one-stop holiday shop for shopping. There's Berkshire-made items, fair trade, sustainable, gifts for every price point and for everybody on your list, from children to adults. So definitely come on down. This year, we will not be doing our usual opening reception. Instead, we're going to coincide it with the Winter Wonderland, which I'll talk about in a second. So on Saturday, December 11th and 18th from 4 to 7 p.m., the Stone Store will be open for the Festival of Holidays. But otherwise, it's open the regular hours, which is Saturdays and Sundays from 11 to 4. So come on down. And just as a reminder, members get 10% off taxable items the first Saturday of every month. So for November and December, come on down that first Saturday. All right, back to our big event for later this year is the Winter Wonderland. This year, our tree display is going to be even bigger, even brighter. Again, it's a free event that all are invited to. Every evening from 4 to 7 p.m., the lights will be on, so you can come on down to stroll around and see the trees. The trees are sponsored and decorated by local businesses, organizations, and families. So they all have their own little look to them, which is really cool. And it definitely embodies the businesses and organizations that were decorated by them. On December 11th and 18th from 4 to 7 p.m. We'll be a little bit extra festive. We'll have Santa. We'll have some carolers who I promise you know who these carolers are, and they will do a wonderful job. We'll have fire pits. We'll have crafts for the kids, and maybe a little bit of refreshments as well. The event is free, but just as a reminder, we're going to be collecting gifts for Toys for Tots, and we also will have our remembrance tree, which is the biggest tree in the middle, and that's where you could put a little ornament just remembering somebody in your life who passed away, or even somebody who is still with us but that you would just like to give extra special honor to by giving them an ornament. And we also, we'll be collecting money for Sheffield organizations like the Food Pantry and Breaking Bread that assist the food insecure. So although it's free, we hope you might think about donating to some of these great causes. And one last thing is that we're going to be doing pre-order sales of 6 to 7 foot Fraser firs, and that's from Ioka Valley Farm. And they're $60 a piece. If you go right on our website starting November 1st, they will be ready for a pre-order, and the pickups will begin on December 8th. So you can have any time from December 8th to up until Christmas Eve to pick them up. So come on down. They're beautiful trees at a great price, and you'll save yourself a trip outside of Sheffield to be able to get your tree. All right, so without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today, Robert Oakes. Robert Oakes is a writer, teacher, storyteller, and singer-songwriter, and he's originally from northern New Jersey, but he's currently residing here in the Berkshires. In 2020, Robert's debut book, Ghost of the Berkshires, was published by Arcadia Publishing. Excuse me for a minute. I'm just letting a couple of people in. There we go. By Arcadia Publishing. That book is available. There's a few copies in the Old Stone store, but also if you check out the link in the email that I sent you and also on our website, you could go to Robert's website and you could order the book there and find out a little bit more about some of the tours that he's giving this year and some other information. I'm sure he'll talk about that later on in the Q&A section after his presentation. Since 2010, Robert has led ghost tours at Edith Wharton's The Mount in Lenox, Massachusetts, and he's represented the museum and its ghosts on Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters, Jeff Bellinger's New England Legend series on PBS, and the Appleseed Show on BYU Radio. In 2021, Robert also began leading ghost tours at Benford Hall and the Church on the Hill, both in Lenox. Robert has written and produced media for AAA, Canyon Ranch, and a number of organizations, and he performs as a part of a Berkshire-based folk music duo, Oakes and Smith. He has taught elementary, middle, and high school English, and he's currently pursuing his master's degree in Middlebury Bread Loaf School in English in Middlebury, Vermont. So welcome, Robert, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful presentation, and we can get started whenever you'd like.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jen. And can everybody hear me okay? Is it all right? Sound coming through all right? All right, great. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and for all of you for joining today. It's really wonderful to connect with the community down in Sheffield. And thanks for coming to hear about our ghosts. And this was really a very enjoyable project for me to sort of go around Berkshire County and look for the ghost stories, look for the lore around ghosts and some of the history connected to these places that are said to be haunted. And it's been a real joy for me to share some of what I found by doing readings like this one. So I'm going to start up my presentation here, and hopefully everyone will see everything okay. So I think the first thing I need to do is share my screen. So hopefully that will work. And then, once I've done that, I'm going to start off. All right, so can you see my presentation? Does that all seem to be working all right? Okay, awesome. So as I mentioned, and as we've said, this is the book Ghosts of the Berkshires, which came out last year. And it is an exploration of some of the more haunted locations here throughout Berkshire County. And I've love exploring this area and all of its many stories and its beautiful and mysterious locations. There is absolutely a special spirit in the air here in Berkshire County. You can feel it everywhere you go. And I think sometimes it manifests as ghosts and ghostly experiences, and other times it's a different sort of experience. Here's a shot of Bascom Lodge at the top of Mount Greylock as a mist rolls in. Such an evocative scene there. And of course, Bascom Lodge and Mount Greylock, that whole area is said to be haunted by the ghost of the old coot. You've got this. Actually, I think I may have taken this down in Sheffield as I was driving along. I don't know what we're seeing here, but interesting shot. And then this was actually just outside my house in Lee, just on the slopes of October Mountain. And you see and you feel this special presence in the air everywhere you look in Berkshire County. Now, as we mentioned, for over a decade now, I've been leading ghost tours, and it started off for me at the Mount in Lenox, but this season I started to offer them at Benford Hall and Church on the Hill. Here I am talking to people beside the grave of the Haggerty family, who were the original owners of the house known as Ventfort, which predated the current structure. And then beside them is the grave of Teddy Wharton, who lived, of course, at the Mount. And then here I am at the Mount giving a ghost tour to a group of paranormal investigators and psychic mediums that came to the house in 2019 while doing a paranormal conference next door at Seven Hills Inn. And this is some of what I do. I take people through and I tell them about the many ghost stories and the many reports of hauntings and other kinds of strange occurrences that people have reported at the Mount. And the Mount, of course, is the home of Edith Wharton. Edith Wharton, one of our great writers, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, best known for writing books that I could call sort of society novels about the very wealthy world that Edith Wharton was a member of and knew very well, very intimately. And part of the reason why some of her contemporaries and family members didn't necessarily appreciate what she was doing is that she kind of, by writing these novels, she opened a window on a world that really was very closed to most people. And that's what she's best known for, books like The House of Mirth and The Age of Innocence. But one thing that's not well known about Wharton is that she also wrote ghost stories. But in order for Wharton to write ghost stories, she had to overcome a debilitating fear, phobia that she had about ghosts and ghost stories that started when she was very young, about 9 years old, after reading a ghost story and suffering a relapse of typhoid that she had been recovering from at the time. And she always blamed the relapse and the anxious, nervous feelings that she had gotten after this, which led well up into her middle 20s, on this ghost story. She seemed to feel that the story could have such an effect on her sensitive mind that it could actually trigger these physical reactions and this psychological reaction that she felt that stuck with her for much of her life. And as it happens, this house that she lived in for 10 years, where she composed some of these stories, has been a place that has inspired many stories because of hauntings and experiences that people have reported there. And there is, again, a special presence about this place. I just happened to snap this picture one day as a storm was rolling in, quite ominous looking clouds, and some say they see a little dog in the clouds. Do you see that? And, of course, that makes sense because Wharton was a lover of dogs. And some people say the house is haunted by ghost dogs. Now, I want to show you this little piece of evidence. This is one of the things that we show during our ghost tour at the Mount. It was taken in the drawing room of the house during one of our first ever ghost tours back in 2009. And what appears here in the middle of the picture, some people believe is a shadow figure, one of the many shadow figures that have been reported at the Mount. Some people see in this an image of a woman in profile. But the thing that's interesting about it is it has this bizarre long neck. And some people say, well, it may be a ghost of a woman, perhaps even Wharton herself. Or it may be something else, something we don't really understand. Or maybe it's just a glitch of the camera or a shadow. It sort of depends on what you believe, right? Which is, in belief, when it comes to ghosts, is an interesting question. And so I do like to ask when I start my tours and my readings is, how many of us believe in ghosts? Now, I can't do a show of hands because I can't see everybody here, but maybe you could think about it a little bit just for yourself. Do you believe that ghosts really do exist in the world? Or is it just a matter of, active imagination and stories that we like to tell, but we don't necessarily believe in the reality of ghosts? And as we take our ghost tours and do our readings, this is an important question. Some people are avid believers in ghosts and believe not only do they exist, but that you can actually access them, contact them, people like paranormal investigators and psychic mediums, while others do not believe at all. And I think the whole thing is kind of nonsense. And we have everything in between, the whole range of responses. And what I'm quick to tell people at the Mount is that when it comes to ghosts, what you believe is really not important because belief, you don't need to believe in ghosts in order to experience a ghost. And this is something that Wharton felt. She wrote this in her preface to her book of ghost stories. She wrote, "I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm afraid of them," she wrote. And what she goes on to say is that to believe is a conscious act of the intellect, right? But it is in the warm darkness of the prenatal fluid, far below our conscious reason, that the faculty dwells with which we apprehend the ghosts we may not be endowed with the gift of seeing. She calls this the ghost instinct, which she believes all of us possess. In other words, to experience a ghost, you need to get out of your head, right? The mind, the intellect, is quick to dismiss things of this nature, but things that we may dismiss in our minds, we may nevertheless feel in our bodies, and we may have a fearful or some kind of reaction to it, even though our minds all the time are saying, it's not real, can't be real. She felt that this was actually a good thing to develop if you are to appreciate a ghost story. Because, of course, when you're reading a ghost story, it's just a story. But nevertheless, a good ghost story can send the shivers down your spine. It can actually cause you to feel that fear, which is real, regardless of what you think about ghosts. Now, Wharton was actually concerned about us moderns and our abilities to maintain this ghost instinct. Now, remember, she was writing over 100 years ago, and things, of course, have only accelerated since then. But she believed that we moderns were in danger of losing this instinct altogether, which she tied actually to our imagination. She felt that there were so many things demanding our time and our attention in our world today that our imaginations were essentially getting hijacked, and we were losing touch with this instinct that we have. At the time, she was blaming that primarily on what she called the wireless, which what she meant was the radio, not Wi-Fi, and the cinema. She called these the worldwide enemies of the imagination. But of course, today, I mean, I can only imagine how she would bemoan the situation where we have so many things that are constantly vying for our attention. And we lose that ability to tune in to those subtler things that are maybe happening in the world all around us. So Wharton actually felt that one way to get this back was to restore our imagination, to sort of build up our ability to, sort of sense these things beyond our usual senses and our usual way of reaching the world. She said that that you may even prime us to feel the presence of a ghost, even though we may not be endowed with the gift of seeing it. And she called this kind of person the ghost feeler. So what is the antidote? If we need a little help with our imaginations, what's the antidote? According to Wharton, of course, read a ghost story, right? A ghost story can express a sense of mystery and wonder. They have this sense of reaching toward the unknown and the unseen, the sense that these things are in the world around us. And so they encourage us to sort of experience the world that way. And to that, I would add, especially given my line of work, take a ghost tour. Take a ghost tour, because what I try to encourage people to do when we do the ghost tours is to try to connect with that mysterious presence that we can feel in a place like the Mount or Ventford Hall, to see if we can feel it too, whatever that may be, whether it's a ghost or something else. And part of the experience is, dimming the lights and sort of going by flashlight through these halls in the darkness and letting it speak to you in a way that may be different from the usual way you engage with a historic location like that. Something that perhaps speaks a little bit more to our intuition and imagination. To reach out into the darkness with our senses open and imagination engaged, to try to make contact with something that lies just beyond the beam of our flashlights. Now, I had been doing the ghost tours at the Mount since 2009. And over the years, it grew into this opportunity to write this book about not just the Mount, but the entire Berkshire region, which I relished because I had heard and was aware of the fact that there were stories of hauntings in other places in the Mount, other places in the Berkshires, but I had not yet fully delved into those. So writing this book gave me a reason to get out there and find out more about the history and more about the stories, to talk to people about the things they experienced or remembered. Things told to them by others. And of course, just to go to these places and feel what it was like to be there. And there are so many of them here in the Berkshires. Here in this picture, you see Ventford Hall, you see Pontusic Lake, you see the Wizard's Glen in Dalton, and then just outside my door here at October Mountain on the bottom right. So when I put the book together, I decided that I wanted to try to organize it in a way that I felt would be representative of the Berkshires and organize the stories that way. So there are 5 chapters. The first one is the ghosts of the hills. Then you have ghosts in the houses, inns, graveyards, and the final chapter, ghostly muse and spiritual spirits, which I think sounds a bit like a Jeopardy category. But it's meant to, so the first one, of course, you've got all of the natural locations, like Pontusic Lake and Bashfish Falls and Mount Greylock, all said to have resident ghosts. Then you've got the houses. Of course, there are many of them in the Berkshires from throughout its history, way back in the colonial times up through the Gilded Age and even beyond, some houses said to have resident spirits. Inns, of course, have long been a part of the Berkshire experience. Some of the really old ones like the New Boston Inn and, of course, the Red Lion Inn, some of those said to be haunted. And then graveyards, of course, there are many, as there are throughout, well, everywhere really, but so many in the New England and especially in Berkshires, some that are really obvious and others you have to really hunt down to find. And what I found is actually there are very few stories about haunted graveyards, as it turns out. I was surprised to find that, but I didn't find many stories about ghosts in graveyards, but I have a few. And then ghostly muse and spiritual spirits represents the two sort of groups that I feel have always been a part of the culture here. The artistic communities like Tanglewood and places like that, and then the spiritual communities like the Shakers that have long been drawn to this area. And so I focused on those areas. So I'm going to start off with Ghosts in the Hills, and what I'm going to do is go through and do some readings from the book to share with you some of what I found and some of the history that I uncovered about these places. And then it includes some things that I wanted to add about Sheffield that I actually was recently made aware of, the Sage's Ravine, which somehow didn't hit my radar when I was working on the book, but I'm so happy to learn about it now. And then at the end, as Jen said, we'll do some questions if you have any. So let me start off now with Bashfish Falls. I wanted to start with something that I thought was pretty close to where you are. I know it borders Sheffield down there, and beautiful, beautiful location with really quite an evocative story attached to it. One of the things you'll if you don't know the story already, or if you do, you'll know that that there is a connection to butterflies related to the story. And when I went down there to, be there and just kind of feel the place as I was working on the piece, I was amazed to see how many butterflies there were actually all over the place. And I took it as a sign that the spirits were with me. So this is my piece on the spirit voices of Bashfish Falls. She stood in the moonlight, wrapped in a white linen robe. Below her was a deep drop of rushing water, cascading and crashing on the boulders. It was June, the time of year when the moon crosses at just the right height to fill the shaggy ravine with a milky pale light. The man who stood below, gazing up at the granite outcrop that split the rushing water into twin falls, thought he saw her faintly in the mist. He thought he heard a voice coming from the water. "Follow me, my child." Looking down into the pool where the falling water foamed and crashed, he thought he saw a smiling face and felt strangely comforted. He felt all would be well if he went with her under the water. Looking back up toward the top of the falls, he was startled to find the phantom had locked eyes with his. "Join me," she said, with her arms outstretched. Then she leapt and vanished. Stories like this have been told of Bashfish Falls, located in Mount Washington in the southwest corner of the Berkshires, since at least the latter part of the 19th century. Inspired by the gloom of the deep gorge and the mesmerizing noise of rushing water, many visitors to these towering falls in the 4,000-acre Mount Washington State Forest believe the place is alive with strange spirits in the mist and the sound of voices in the woods and water. Local lore says that the Mohican tribes that once inhabited the area were also wary of the falls, believing them to be haunted by the spirit of a water witch they called Bashfish. As the story goes, Bashfish was a beautiful young woman who was much loved by all, except for one jealous friend who began spreading rumors that she had been unfaithful to her husband. Though she insisted on her innocence, Bashfish was found guilty by the tribal council and was sentenced to death by drowning. On the day she was to die, Bashfish was brought to the top of the falls where she was to be tied to a canoe and sent over. But to the amazement of onlookers, the young woman was suddenly surrounded by a halo of sunlight and butterflies. The tribesmen were afraid. Was this the presence of the Great Spirit or the dark powers of witchcraft? Seizing her opportunity in this moment of confusion, Bashfish ran to the edge of the falls and threw herself over the edge. And as she fell, they say the butterflies and sunlight enveloped her body, which was never found in the pools below. From that day on, the legend grew of the witch who lived within the falls. Some say they could see her form in the falling water. Many reported hearing an eerie voice above the crashing and splashing, repeatedly speaking her name or calling unwary travelers to her. All stayed as far away from the place as possible, fearing the witch's curse. But the tale doesn't end there. For Bashfish was said to have left behind an infant daughter, White Swan, who grew to become one of the most beautiful women in the village. And when the time came for Whirling Wind, the son of the chief, to take a wife, White Swan was chosen for him. But he was never told that she was the daughter of Bashfish. At first, the marriage was happy. White Swan and Whirling Wind were in love. But when the young woman was unable to bear a child, a dark cloud settled over their marriage. It was imperative that Whirling Wind, who was next in line to lead the tribe, produce a male heir to continue the line of tribal chiefs. So it was decided that he would take another wife who could bear him a son. White Swan bore this as best she could. She understood the need to continue the line, but the presence of this other woman tortured her. Over time, White Swan grew pale and thin. She began to wander away from the village at night to linger by the forbidden falls, lured there by the mesmerizing voices in the water. One night, worried for his wife, Whirling wind followed her to the falls, and he found her standing on the high rocks above, lit by the moon. He called to her, and she spoke, but not to him. She seemed to be answering a voice in the water below that only she could hear. Mother, I'm here. Take me. Whirling wind then saw a white-robed figure reach toward her from the falls. In that moment, all became clear. He knew the secret that had been kept from him. His wife was the daughter of the water witch. Their marriage was cursed. He clambered up the rocks and reached to pull her from the edge, but she looked at him and leapt. Distraught, he leapt after her, and in the morning, the search party found only the body of Whirling Wind, broken on the rocks. For years afterward, many said they saw the spirit of Bashfish, seemingly at peace, happily reunited with White Swan. Some claimed to see her smiling face in the moonlit water. Others said they spotted the forms of both mother and daughter in the twin falls. Many heard the sound of spirit voices in the water, eternally repeating the name of the witch. Bashfish, Bashfish, Bashfish. It may be that this tale was not told by the Mohicans who once inhabited this region. It's very likely it was an invention of the Europeans who began to settle the area in the late 1600s, the Dutch farmers from New York, and later the operators of the many iron forges that once stood nearby. Beginning in 1852, when the extension of the Harlem Line Railroad made the region accessible, travelers and tourists began to flock there. Inns were built to offer accommodations, and there is no doubt that the proprietors felt that a good ghost story could help sell the location. But people also seemed to sense some spirit in the ravine, something that existed long before storytellers tried to capture it. Many observers have noted that a mysterious force moves with the water as it emerges from the source near the summit of Mount Washington and runs through the rugged rocky gorge along the west side of the Dome Mountain, plunging down the 80-foot tall falls and rolling into New York State, where it eventually empties into the Roll of Jansen Kill and the Hudson River. Many journalists and local writers like Joseph E.A. Smith and Willard Douglas Coxey have tried to describe it. Painters like John Frederick Kensett of the Hudson River School sought to capture it in images. French tightrope walker Charles Blondin, who was famous for crossing Niagara Falls in 1859, felt drawn to perform a similar feat at Bashfish, though it was reported he was more afraid of falling to his death there than he ever was at Niagara. In fact, many have been drawn there over the years, and some have indeed fallen to their death. This has led local authorities to institute strict rules against climbing and swimming. What is it that has drawn so many to answer, as Smith wrote in 1879, the hurrying summons in the impatient roar of the cascade, to venture into what the Hartford Courant in 1854 called an exceedingly gloomy and dangerous ravine? Apparently, this summoning force has been compelling enough to draw many thousands, despite the dangers and superstitions. It is not so much the fall of water, wrote one Pittsfield Sun observer in 1844, as the wild sublimity of the gorge that will strike you. And this wild sublimity just might inspire you to dream up stories of your own, like the tales of a ghostly face in a moonlit pool, or of spirit voices in the rushing waters that call unwary travelers to the deep. Now, as I mentioned, I was so happy to learn about, Jen mentioned this story about Sage's Ravine, which I'm sure you're aware of. Maybe you've heard of the story, or certainly the location, as it straddles the border between the Berkshires and Connecticut. And so I did a little bit of searching into this story and found some sources that tell the tale. So I wanted to share it with you just in case you may not be familiar with it, or maybe would just like to hear it again, just a little bit about this. So one of the sources that I found was this book, 1839, John and Warner Barber, Historical Collections of Every Town in Massachusetts. And this, from what I can see, this appears to be one of the earliest written records of this story, and was a source used by this guy, Bernard Carman, who wrote about it in the Eagle in 1955. And so I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'll just share a little bit of it. The story of the Sage's Ravine poltergeists. It's really quite something. So this, as I said, is set in that ravine where at that time there was a mill This would have been in early 1800s. And the mystery began. So here's the story. The mystery began November 8th, 1802. This is from Bernard Carman, by the way. Mr. Sage had a small garment manufacturing shop at his home. And that evening, a man and two boys, otherwise unidentified, were in the shop. Shortly after 10, the two boys went to bed, and the man was preparing to retire when, without warning, a large block of wood crashed through the window. The boys leaped out of bed in time to see pieces of mortar follow the wood. As the bombardment continued, an old account says mildly, the man and boys became alarmed. Surely a considerable understatement under the circumstances, and went to the house to call Mr. Sage. The proprietor arose in haste and went to the shop. His presence did nothing to abate the rain of missiles. Standing outside, Mr. Sage could hear and see windows breaking, but could not see where the flying objects were coming from, nor through the night, though the night was light, could he discover anyone on the premises. The miscellaneous objects continued to crash against the building until the sky lightened in the east, when, as suddenly and mysteriously as it had begun, the bombardment ceased. About 8 the next evening, the account says, the hail of objects began again and lasted till midnight, when again it ceased. The next evening it started up again, continuing through the evening, and true to form, stopped abruptly. It seems safe to assume that Mr. Sage was both mystified and greatly disturbed by the end of the third visitation, though the record does not mention his reaction. The pattern changed the next day. All previous bombardments had been at dusk or in the dark. On November 11th, however, the missiles began to fly about an hour before sunset and continued for an hour or so in more or less broad daylight. Again, a thorough search failed to reveal the source of the stones, which, as usual, stopped without warning, leaving the Sage establishment at peace for the moment. The hail resumed almost immediately at the home of Ezekiel Landon, a quarter of a mile away on the Sheffield-Mount Washington town line. After several hours of steady drumming on the Landon house, the rocks stopped flying for a brief period. Then, while the Landon family was at breakfast, the hail of stones began again. After 2 or 3 hours, the bombardment stopped. By this time, of course, word of the singular events in Sage's Ravine had spread, and spectators were crowding the area to witness the weird manifestation. Included among the sightseers, according to the report, were a number of clergymen and other sober gentlemen of great repute. They were unsuccessful in their diligent efforts to discover the source of the mischief, but the increasing crowds of spectators were not disappointed, for the bombardment began again the evening of November 12th, continuing for several hours and, as usual, ceasing abruptly. The final rain of stones came on the evening of November 13th, when the rattle of missiles continued for several hours before it stopped suddenly and, as it turned out, finally, the phenomenon had ended. Now, it goes on to talk about this wild speculation about what could be causing this. And some people, of course, said witchcraft, and others said it was pranksters at work. One of the things, though, that they found was really unusual about this was that it seemed that some of the rocks and other things would go through a hole, would sort of make a hole on their first fly, and then others would go through the exact same hole. And so they thought, well, if somebody is throwing or using a slingshot, they have to be pretty amazing marksmen to do this, right? So they started to feel, well, it seems as though they never really solved the mystery. They were never really sure what happened. They were sort of surprised to find that not as many things were broken by this as they expected. Not as many windows and walls were damaged by this spray of rocks and wood and other things. The article concludes this way: our Sheffield case, however, does not fit this pattern. To be sure, the first visitation was made to two, let me just skip ahead a little bit. Unless those 34 years between the event and the first written account produced a fantastic amount of embroidery, which seems unlikely, we must admit that the 5-day bombardment is inexplicable with the facts at hand. In any event, if you drive a convertible, you'd better keep the top up while passing Sage's Ravine. Now, I don't know if there have been any recent reports of this kind of thing, but it's really it's a pretty interesting story, and it seems to be one of those unsolved mysteries. But Interesting to find another haunted ravine down that way. Now, the next section of the book is, of course, about houses, and a couple of them now are very close to my heart because I've been giving ghost tours there. Of course, the Mount for a very long time now, so I've become very acquainted with its stories and its ghosts. And Benford Hall is relatively new for me, just this season, getting to know it, and that's been a real joy. Some of these places, like Houghton Mansion, is no longer open to the public for tours or investigations. And it used to be a real hotspot of paranormal activity, like paranormal research. A lot of different groups would want to go there to investigate, but apparently they no longer allow that. And of course, two of these that are on this list no longer exist. The Antlers on October Mountain completely burned down, so much so that I'm not even sure people are totally sure where it was, but it was somewhere up there on October Mountain. William Whitney, who built it, used it as a kind of hunting lodge while he set aside about 1,000 acres of the mountain for big game that he imported, so that he could go out there and hunt. One of the animals apparently made its way down into Lenox long after Whitney's death. It used to be seen walking around the main street. They named him Old Bill the Moose. And eventually someone killed him, and his head is now stuffed and is in the Berkshire Museum, which I went to see recently. And then in Ashantully, a very mysterious place in Tyringham, was built by an Egyptologist named Rob de Pester Titus. And one of the things he seemed to be up to was to take and put some of the findings from the Egypt's Valley of the Kings and other places there at Ashantully, which led some to believe that the place was haunted by a mummy's curse. And that was part of what led to the downfall of the place and its burning down in the 50s. Personally, I think it's a beautiful place with a very good, bright spirit. And so I don't know if I believe in the mummy's curse story, but it is one of the things that exist out there in the lore. But here, of course, we have the Mount. And in some ways, the Mount was a challenging chapter to write because there's so many stories that I'm aware of about the Mount and my own personal experiences there, that I had to choose. Now, if you're familiar with the Mount, you know that during its history, it was a girls' boarding school for about 30 years. And it was also the site of Shakespeare and Company, where they first got started, was at the Mount. And they were in residence there for about 22 years. And so stories come to us from the time of the girls' boarding school. Those are some of the earliest reports, right through Shakespeare and Company and up until present day. And as I mentioned early on, Wharton had this phobia about ghosts and ghost stories. She said after she read this ghost story when she was a child, she began to feel as though a dark and undefinable menace forever dogged her steps. That's how she put it. And interestingly, the Mount, one of the main things that people report at the Mount is a shadow figure, which I connect to Wharton's undefinable menace. But who knows? The whole thing is very mysterious. But here's a bit of the chapter on the Mount. There is reason to wonder whether a dark menace remained at the Mount after Wharton's departure, and she left there in 1911. For as the years passed, the estate began to develop a reputation. People began to talk about its ghosts. Some of the earliest reports came from the students of Fox Hollow School, who claimed to have conversations with the ghost of a woman in the cupola stairwell in the attic. According to the 1986 book, The Ghostly Register by Arthur Myers, another student said she witnessed an apparition in a white lace dress moving along the terrace and believed it to be the spirit of Wharton herself. In those years, she recalled, there were many rumors of the author's presence. Some claimed to hear her typing. Others said every creak was Wharton walking the halls. Years later, members of Shakespeare and Company reportedly witnessed some very dramatic sightings. According to the Ghostly Register, the company's founder, Tina Packer, described waking one stormy night to find the figure of a ponytailed man standing with his back to her in the center of the room. After calling out to him, she said, the figure turned and looked at her, and it was at that moment she knew it was a ghost. Frightened, she pulled the covers up over her head, and when she summoned the courage to look again, the figure was gone. In the same book, another founding member of the company, Dennis Krausnick, reported a similar nighttime visitation, only his was more threatening. Krausnick said he woke to find a tall figure dressed in a hooded cloak standing next to his bed. He recalled being unable to see the figure's face as the hood was drawn down over it. Though he tried to sit up, Krausnick said he was unable to move, as if something was holding him down on the bed. After some time, Krausnick said he was able to lift himself up, but by then the vision had vanished. Now, I wrote to Tina Packer to ask her if she could sort of validate the reports from this book and if she had anything further to add. Well, she was great because she sent me multiple emails. She had a lot that she wanted to say about the experience at the Mount. This is some of what she wrote. Dennis was the first person to stay overnight in the Mount. He was measuring rooms and wondering how many people we could house there. As he was working at dusk, he heard footsteps on the top floor. He called up the stairs, but all was silent. He returned to his task, and again he heard footsteps. This time he went up to the top floor to look for whoever it was, but there was no one. Then he started to get very scared. He slept that night in the car because he didn't want to be alone in the Mount. On windy nights, it was often possible to hear the laughing of young girls coming from the tennis court on the other side of the square garden. And of course, the house itself was full of shadows. Since the days of Shakespeare and Company, there have been many reports of shadowy figures at the Mount. They have been seen in the main house, as well as in some of the outbuildings on the property. A number of years ago, a staff member discovered a workman sitting with his head in his hands beside the ticket booth. When asked what was wrong, the man said that as he was working on the second floor of the stable, he saw the figure of a man crouching in the space just beneath the roof. The figure looked back at him with a piercing stare. The workman rubbed his eyes, hoping that they were just playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, the thing was still there. According to the report, the workman was so upset by the encounter that he needed to take the rest of the day off. One of the Mount's tour guides also needed some time to recover after reportedly witnessing a tall, slender, shadowy figure gliding toward her from the Henry James suite. And a cleaner who was working the graveyard shift once ran from the house, leaving the vacuum behind her on the stairs after seeing an exceedingly tall form leaning out from one of the doors on the bedroom floor. The shadow of an unseen man was said to hover above a guide shadow on the wall of Teddy Wharton's den, and another shadow figure, this one of a silhouette of a woman, appeared in a photograph that was taken in the drawing room, which was the picture that I showed you earlier. So as I said, so many reports of shadows at the Mount that it's become for me kind of an iconic haunt there, that there just seems to be many of them, or it's the same one reappearing to many people in different places. Well, of course, the inns here in the Berkshires have long been a part of our history, and there are some really wonderful ones. The New Boston Inn was great to visit, so old and such great stories there, primarily about Harriet. They say that Harriet, the ghost of Harriet, who was a bride, who was married there and was shot by her jilted ex-boyfriend, still haunts the place. But the one I'm going to focus on here is the Red Lion Inn, which of course is iconic. So many people know the Red Lion Inn, have stayed at the Red Lion Inn, or have sat on that beautiful porch. It truly is a landmark here in the Berkshires. And as it happens, it has many stories of ghosts. One of the fun things about researching this one was I decided to see if I could find anything online in travel review sites. You know, people would stay at a place and then leave a review about their experience. And I was looking to see if anybody had said anything about being haunted while they were staying there. And sure enough, story after story about room 301. And so I decided to include some of those reports in this piece. Perhaps the inn's most notorious guest is the ghost said to haunt room 301. A cheerful little room at the end of the third floor hallway. It is this ghostly resident, along with other reported apparitions and occurrences, that make the Red Lion Inn a favorite haunt of paranormal investigators and psychic mediums. A glance at an online travel site reveals a number of eerie accounts that are said to have occurred in room 301, including reports of sheets and toes tugged, gentle touches on the head and face, scratches on the hand, and even an unseen entity entering the room and climbing into bed. More than one reviewer also mentioned seeing an apparition of a man in a top hat. Over the years, a number of paranormal investigators have sought to verify these claims. Berkshire folklorist Joe Derwin, who writes about local mysteries on his blog, These Mysterious Hills, once checked himself into the infamous room 301 to conduct his own investigation, where he reported certain electronic fluctuations while using what's known as an EMF detector. It's a device often used in paranormal investigations. He said between the bed and the armoire. Another group called the Paranormal Adventurers reported anomalies in the rooms, unexplained phenomena. They claimed that a video camera that was left running through the night recorded 18 knocks, mostly from the armoire. And they claimed that the camera also captured a hazy figure move past the mirror at 2 a.m. And they said something else crossed the room and struck the camera's tripod. While room 301 does appear to be an especially active room, reports of strangeness at the Red Lion Inn are not confined to that location. In room 424, for example, one guest reported feeling that something was standing over her bed. Another guest asked to be moved to a different room because of the many disturbances he experienced during the night. Others have claimed to see the apparition of a girl with flowers in her hand. Another visitor said she felt an unseen hand brush against her while walking down the stairs into the first floor parlor. And according to a former housekeeper, much of the cleaning staff believes the entire fourth floor of the inn is haunted. So, how does the management of the Red Lion Inn feel about all these reports? Well, they seem to enjoy the mystery of it all. In response to the question of whether the inn is haunted, they wrote on their website, after 235 years, that's a lot of guests. And old buildings do make strange noises. So there are a lot of rumors and stories. Are they true? Why not decide for yourself and let us know if you see anything? I love the fact that the Red Lion Inn is sort of being playful about it. It wasn't long ago, I think that many, and maybe even some still today, many, inns and B&Bs and places like that, if they have stories about ghosts, they don't talk about it because they're afraid it'll scare away business. But I think these days, many of these places are welcoming it, encouraging it even, because people seem to want to stay in haunted inns. So that has changed. Now, as I mentioned before, graveyards, you would expect, or at least I expected, that there would be many stories about haunted graveyards. And as I learned, there are actually very few in the Berkshires that I was aware of. The biggest story I found was about the old Berkshire grave robbings said to have happened frequently in the 19th century, centered around Pittsfields. But as far as ghosts go, well, I did find just the faintest glimmer of a story at the church on the hill where I give the ghost tours there now. And there's a story about a woman named Hannah Leidig who was seen in the graveyard and in the church windows. But the big one for me was the West Branch Road Cemetery, which is located on October Mountain. And at the time that it was laid down, my sense is that it was actually at the center of a community where there were many farmers and woodcutters living up on the mountain there near Washington. But as time went on and the people moved away from that area, and now it's, of course, a state park, and there are very few people living nearby. And so you have this sense that the graveyard was just sort of left there, and over time has become what is known as the Lost Cemetery of West Branch Road. It isn't actually lost. You can go up there and visit it, but I did find it hard to find the first time I went looking for it. It took me some time to figure it out, but I did find it, and it was really wonderful to connect with the place. So I'll just read briefly from that. Perhaps the most notoriously haunted Berkshire graveyard is the West Branch Road Cemetery on October Mountain, said to be haunted by the ghost of 10-year-old Anna Pease, who was buried there on January 22nd, 1829. To find it, you have to drive into the woods along rocky dirt roads, departing the paved highway that skirts the state forest through the town of Washington. To find it for the first time, you have to believe it is there, because no signs point the way, and the deeper you drive into the woods, the further you will feel from any place that has ever been inhabited by people. And as the dark woods surround you, you might remember the eerie stories you have heard about this mountain, stories of an unseen presence, of eyes peering through tree trunks, of Sasquatch sightings, and even of strange lights hovering overhead in the night. You might feel inclined then to turn back, but if you persist, you will be rewarded. The graveyard is there, though its stones are crumbling, and the forest reclaims. And I just go on to say that there is a deep feeling of calm here, and you can sense the years that have passed and the presence of another world, another time, and the lives lived long ago. There is a feeling of sadness, an atmosphere of longing. Do those spirits want to see their stones set upright again? Do they feel neglected and lost out here, forgotten by the world? Do they just want us to remember them, to bring them home to our hearts and hearts through the stories that we share? Very little is left now aside from those memories, stones, and stories, like the one people tell of a ghostly girl dressed all in white, stepping lightly among the stones. And again, I found the story to be very slim. There wasn't a lot of reports, but people say they see this little girl's spirit moving in this area by the stones, and they hear her voice or they hear her humming. Those are the stories, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Not a lot of a tale there. But the location is definitely well worth a visit. It's very beautiful, and as I said, a little bit sad, but calm and peaceful. Well, of course, the ghostly muse and spiritual spirits being the last chapter. And I just wanted to share quickly with you, someone from the Berkshire Museum, Jason, called me and said, we found something and you need to come look at it. And it was so cool. And what it was a piece of what appears to have been a marble stone obelisk or possibly a fountain that was set there in Tyringham by the Shakers outside of one of their communities that they had there in Tyringham during a period of time when what they believed, well, they would sort of meet at these mountaintop retreats and have meetings and conduct these dances and sessions where they would kind of have ecstatic visions and things of this nature. And one of the stories that came out of that time was apparently they chased the devil up the mountain and buried him head first with clamshells in his hands so that he would dig himself back to hell. And this was a story that I mentioned in the book. So they called me and they said, you have to come see, we found a piece of one of these stone monuments that they built. And as you can see there, it says, it is a piece of the monument erected to the devil by the Shakers on their holy ground, where they are said to have buried the devil at Tyringham, Mass. So that was a pretty cool find, and I was so happy to be called in there to take a look at it. But the last thing I want to share with you is a piece on, or just a piece of a piece on Tanglewood. Of course, the well-known music festival here in the Berkshires, said to be haunted, has its own history, actually. The houses that are there, Highwood and Tanglewood, related to the Transcendentalist movement and sort of some of the earliest cottages built in the Berkshires. And this one is a place where Leonard Bernstein, who's long been associated with, who long was associated with Tanglewood, was said to have paranormal experiences of his own. So I'll read quickly. Bernstein himself was said to have encountered the Highwood ghost on the infamous second floor. Between 1986 and his death in 1990, the celebrated composer and conductor used one of those rooms as an office. It was there in 1990, just 2 months before he died, that he reportedly leapt from his seat, threw his hands up toward the ceiling and shouted, "What is it that's there? Who is it that's there?" BSO volunteer Barbara Greenbaum said Lenny really believed in ghosts. He really did. She went on to describe a kind of musical seance that Bernstein arranged shortly after his eerie encounter. Greenbaum explained Bernstein and composer Andre Previn, around the time of Bernstein's death, came up to the top floor of Highwood Manor at midnight to play Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart to try to summon up the ghost. No spirit appeared to the men that night, Greenbaum said, but people loved the story. It's just fun to think that these two giants of music loved it and believed it so much that they snuck in here at night to try to make contact. Composer John Williams, who recently composed a piece titled Highwood's Ghost to celebrate the encounter, also affirmed Bernstein's belief. I well remember one night, he wrote, as Lenny was making his way up the first stairwell, exclaiming, "This place is haunted." It may be expected that Lenny, genius that he was, might have had a special ability to receive transmission from the sphere of spirits and signs. Indeed, the Highwood ghost encounter was not the first transmission Bernstein was said to have experienced at Tanglewood. Former assistant Charlie Harmon, in his memoir, On the Road and Off the Record with Leonard Bernstein, wrote that the famed musician was noticeably upset after conducting a performance of Beethoven's Symphony No. 3. He said to me in the second movement, a funeral march, "I saw somebody walking across the back of the stage. I wondered why anybody would be back there. Who was it?" I asked. "Kusi," Elby said, his face suddenly drawn, the lines going deep. I stopped what I was doing. Dr. Kuzovitsky, founder of Tanglewood, died in 1951. I'm certain of it. It was Kusi, Elby said. Interestingly, Harmon went on to write that on this particular night, there was an astrological convergence, a once-in-a-million-years alignment of stars and planets, which inspired Bernstein and others to stay up late to absorb this exceptional energy, predicted to peak at 4 a.m. Is it possible that on this night of cosmic alignment, that particular piece of music performed in that rarefied location, conducted by a man said to be especially attuned to the sphere of spirits and signs, may have revealed a momentary glimpse of the other world in the form of Kusi's ghost? Was this what led Bernstein and Previn to venture up to the top floor of Highwood at midnight some years later to try to summon up the spirit with song? If so, why did it not seem to work that night? Could it have been that they chose the wrong piece? BSO volunteer Cabe Kozakov seemed to think so. He commented, they should have played Beethoven Opus 70, number 1, the Ghost Trio. All right. So those are just some of the pieces from the book that I wanted to share. And as I said, it was such an enjoyable experience to kind of go looking for these stories throughout the Berkshires. And I know that there are more. And in fact, people have come to me since and said, well, what about this place? Or what about that story? And as I said, just now learning about Sage's Ravine, I don't know. I think maybe there might be a volume 2 that's needed because there are just so many stories. But I encourage you, when you get out there, to go visit some of these places. Some of what I've been hearing from people is that they're using the book as a kind of guidebook to go and explore some of the locations. And I think that's wonderful because, as I said, I think there's so many places here in the Berkshires that have a special presence to them. And if you can go there and spend a little time there, you can get a sense of it. And if you do have any special experience when you're there, I encourage you to tell your own story about it. And let's keep this lore going. Because that's how it lives on, is in the stories that we remember and that we tell to one another and sometimes write down. So Ghost of the Berkshires, as we said, it's available there at the Stone store and also in many bookstores locally. And it is online as well at different places like arcadiapublishing.com and Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I do have ghost stores happening at the Mount, Benford Hall, and Church on the Hill. We have one coming up on the 30th at Church on the Hill at 5 o'clock. And then Benford Hall, we're actually going to keep going after Halloween. We're going to have some extra dates in November and December. So if you wanted to come on one of those, that'll soon be announced on the website, gildedage.org. And then there's more about me and all the things I'm up to, including the book I'm now working on about my home state of New Jersey, robertoaks.net. So if there are any questions, I'd love to hear any comments, anything that you wanted to share. I'd love to hear from you. See here, did I stop the share?
Hello, Robert.
Hi.
Hi, Tom Neal here.
Hi.
I joined your discussion about 10 minutes late, but my wife was in on it from the beginning, and I picked up where you were talking about Edith Wharton and her ideas on imagination. Could this have something to do with why children seem so susceptible to seeing and hearing spirits and not being terrified of them? My oldest granddaughter had when she was about 2 or 3 years old, she was sitting in the living room with her parents. She was playing on the coffee table and her parents were in there with her. And as Abby was sitting there playing, every once in a while, she'd look up and she'd either ask a question or respond to a question to what was obviously blank space. And her parents watched her very carefully. Her parents said the unnerving thing about it was their 2 dogs were staring in exactly the same direction that Abby was looking. And so they asked Abby afterwards who she was talking to, and she matter-of-factly said, "My friend." And the name she gave, and I don't recall it, the name she gave was almost like an ancient biblical name that a 2 or 3 year old child, I don't know where else they'd hear it, but she wasn't frightened. And the dogs weren't frightened either. They seemed to accept whatever was going on. But Abby's 15 now. And if you ask Abby about this, she can't remember a thing about it.
Wow. I came across that myself in a number of places. Like I'm thinking about the New Boston Inn, where apparently somebody had written in the Sandusfield Times while she was babysitting children at the Sandusfield Inn, the children used to talk frequently about the woman with the blue feet that they would have conversations with. And of course, she was freaked out, but they weren't, right? And So yeah, it's so interesting to this idea that children might actually have greater access to that because they have greater connection to their own imaginations. And then people also talk about dogs and cats, like, you know, sitting in a room and like you said, just like looking at something, and it kind of freaks you out a little bit because like, what are they seeing?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
No, and you know, when you mentioned that, I was thinking about this article from 1959. That part of it that I didn't read about the Sage's Ravine is that this is interesting. He says, let's see, where's a good place to start? Researchers have noted that poltergeists usually manifest themselves to adolescents who are perhaps more susceptible to suggestion than adults. Most adults would hesitate to expand the falling of a twig, say, into a shower of rocks from the spirit world. An adult might be capable of the imaginative processes involved, but fear of ridicule would hold him back. Adolescents, unwilling to face the uncertainties of an adult world, sometimes fall back on the imaginative resources of childhood and thus would have a visit from the spirit world. So that's interesting, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, I think because you think about this thing about imagination, and typically what we think of as imagination means necessarily that it doesn't exist, right? You're making it up. But I think that what Wharton had in mind was something that where it's almost like the imagination can help us as a way to kind of get beyond our rational and sensory way of knowing things to maybe another way of experiencing the world, where we might actually be able to sense the presence of these ghostly things that are not available to our sight and other senses.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's an interesting idea, and I don't know the answer, but I love that story.
Yeah, we do too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And also, I welcome anyone to start your video again, because I see a few of you have your videos off. So if you wanted to do a question, feel free to turn your video on and unmute yourself. But in the meantime, in the chat, we have a question from Cora and Ray. And I guess this is to Robert, but to anybody else as well. If there are any sightings at Jacob's Pillow, which was a stop on the Underground Railroad as a at Carter's Farm. So does anybody know anything about that or heard any stories?
I can just say that I didn't come across anything in as I was looking around, but that doesn't mean there aren't stories. It may not have landed on my radar. Does anyone else know of any?
Yeah. Casey, you'll need to unmute. I see you, Casey. Just unmute.
Can't hear you.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay. How did you get started in this? In the Berkshires? Why from New Jersey did you come to the Berkshires and say, I'm going to go find ghosts?
Well, I didn't come here looking for ghosts that I was aware of. Although I will say this, my first residence at in the Berkshires was the Bidwell House. And it was, you know, I had grown up in New Jersey. I was looking for a new experience. And I thought, well, let me go to the Berkshires. This seems like a really special place. What I loved about the Berkshires is that it seemed to have a very strong cultural sense as well as connection to nature. And that seemed like a really good combination for me. So came here and took up this job at the Bidwell House. But early on, when I came to interview and meet everybody, I was asking myself, is this house haunted? Because I need to know that. If I'm going to live in this house, I need to know if I'm going to be living with a ghost. And early on, I got the sense that the Bidwell House may have been haunted. And I started to feel like it was probably the Reverend himself, and that the feeling was that it was a kind of a watchful presence that seemed kind and protective. And I was like, all right, I think I can live with this. But the whole ghost, like sort of looking for ghosts and this interest actually started when I was working at the Mound. And when I took the job at the Mound, I didn't know I was going to get involved in the ghosts. In fact, the year that I started, they hadn't even started their ghost tours. They were only just beginning it. So I first accepted the job as a tour guide. And that's when I learned they were offering these ghost tours. And that's also when I found out that Edith Wharton had this history being afraid of ghosts, but also writing ghost stories. And I became completely fascinated by it. I just was totally drawn into it from the first ghost tour that I went on. And it just sort of grew into my main role at the Mound. And then along the way, the opportunity came my way through the Mount to write this book. And I just sort of followed it. But the way I feel about it is that the ghosts have kind of found me. I didn't come looking for them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to mute myself.
So any other ghost stories or any other questions out there?
Hi. So
Hi.
I have two. So on my grandmother's side, I have a great grandfather that had passed away, and on my grandfather's side, I had a great grandmother that passed away. And I went, and when I would used to go to a day camp at a park near my house, I would always feel I saw them on this specific bench, and that like they were talking to me, and it was like really cool because it had happened because I was about 7 or 8 at the time, and it was a really cool. It was very important, and it made me feel better because my great grandmother, she would always talk about like how like things would be okay, and she was a very positive woman, and she always kind of expressed that to me when I heard her.
I love that. I love hearing about that. I mean, I feel like so much of it too, like what you're describing, is these presences can be so comforting to us, and we can feel their presence and know that they're still with us and offering some support or guidance. And thank you for sharing that. That's really lovely to hear.
Yeah, also I really loved your presentation. It was amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, I must say, a question I get a lot is if the Dan Raymond house is haunted. I've never experienced anything, but when sometimes I'm working on an exhibit pretty late, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and it's very, very dark there. So I always feel a little bit of uneasiness, but I've never actually had any experience on any of the Historical Society properties.
And I would love to hear more about stories from Sheffield too, because I didn't come across many or any really. Now, of course, the stage is Ravine. This is great. I mean, it's what a find. But if there are any more, if anyone else has stories to share, I'd love to hear from them.
Yeah, I'll put a message on the website, in case anybody stumbles upon it, to send a message right to you. So
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the greatest joys of working on this book too was like when I would tell people that I'm working on this book about ghosts, people would, lean in and they'd be like, I have a story, and that kind of thing would happen often. And one of the things I find that I think might be true is that people may have, like a lot of people have had experiences, but they don't necessarily talk about them, because they're not sure that they'll be well received. Maybe people will think, that sounds kind of crazy or whatever. So they don't talk about it. And so because they know I lead ghost tours and I write about ghosts, people share these stories with me. And I just think it's such a great thing to hear from people about these experiences that they've had that are so unusual and, just kind of take them out of everyday life and are sort of hard to understand even what just happened, but they're part of many people's experience.
all right, any more questions out there or any stories to share? All right, I'm not. Oh, yep. Oh, Eliana.
Sorry. So actually, I just wanted to say that, I really love like good ghost stories because I just find it very interesting, like old places, and I think that honestly it's very very interesting to see how spirits can be connected to these places, and sometimes even the things or anything, and it's really interesting, and I love those kind of stories, like ghost hunters and everything, and shows like that. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, I agree. There's something so compelling, just like what is going on here. It's very mysterious. And it's cool to feel the presence. This happens on our ghost tours. Like just last night, I gave ghost tours at the Ventford Hall and the Mount. And on both tours, there were moments where people suddenly started to say, oh my God, there's something here. Like I feel something. And like, you could just feel the energy of the room totally change, because now everybody's like feeling the presence of something that, people are having cold spots, and someone said they felt a tug on their shirt. And it's very cool to have that kind of suddenly happen at a moment when it was otherwise very quiet, and you suddenly start to feel like, we're not alone anymore, are we?
So you still do ghost tours, right?
Yeah, I do them at the Mount, Benford Hall, and the Church on the Hill.
Okay, that's very interesting, actually, because I would at some point like to go to one.
I hope you do. And the Mount's actually, one thing to know at the Mount that you might be interested in is that like all the in-person tours are sold out right now, but we're doing an online tour on Halloween at 10 o'clock. So you can log in and watch me walk around the scary rooms and tell stories, and you all can be in the comfort and safety of home. And it's not quite the same as being at the Mount, but it is cool to watch it online. So that's 10 o'clock on Halloween, 10 o'clock at night on Halloween. EdithWharton.org is the place to go to register.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to tell you that actually, when I get older, I would like to actually be a paranormal investigator, because I really just love that, just everything about, just spirits and everything. I feel very connected to like this kinds of things.
Yeah, that's cool. And there's a guy on our team this season at the Mount who is a paranormal investigator, actually. And he said he got started, I think he was about 14 years old when he got started. So he's been doing it a long time. And he even had, like, he'll bring his devices with him on our ghost tour, because he's sort of looking for evidence. And, he's actively trying to debunk our stories and also support them if he can. But he doesn't often find things. But wow, last night he got these big spikes on this counter that he uses that detects electromagnetic energy in the top floor of the stable, and he was very excited. And it was great to see that he had this moment where he found some what he considered to be very strong evidence.
That's very interesting.
It's cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been very informative and more history in it than I thought there would be. So that's really cool. And you've definitely gotten us in the Halloween spirit. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for hosting me. And did you say that the cemetery walk is on the 30th or the 31st?
It's on the 31st, so it's on Halloween.
On Halloween, okay.
2 to 4 p.m. So definitely go and sign up. They're in 15-minute increments, and you could go with big group from your family if you wanted, or friends. So just go on our website, sign up. And
I'd definitely like to see that, and especially because I heard about the Spur family pie, similar to the Sedgwick pie up in Stockbridge. And apparently there's one in that cemetery as well. So I'm eager to learn more about it. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye, everyone. Hope to see some of you out next week. Bye now.
Take care. Thanks.